She cannot give you an heir, his advisors insisted. The Duke looked at his barren wife and said, "Then the line ends with me." His advisor called her a broken tool and demanded he trade her for a younger, fertile bride to save the family name. For 6 years, the Duke of Blackwood watched the light die in his wife's eyes as she failed to give him a son. But when the annulment papers hit the desk, the Duke didn't sign them. He looked his advisor dead in the eye and delivered the 5 words that would destroy 300 years of history. But the advisor wasn't just worried about the bloodline, he was hiding a secret plot to steal the entire fortune for himself. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Weight of Legacy. The rain came in sheets against the study windows, each gust of wind sending rivulets racing down the glass like tears. Duke Alistair Blackwood sat motionless at his mahogany desk, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers that documented 3 centuries of Blackwood history. The pages before him chronicled births, deaths, marriages, and inheritances, an unbroken chain stretching back to 1624, when the first Duke of Blackwood had received his title from King James. The study smelled of leather and smoke, of old paper and the peculiar mustiness that clung to ancient documents. A fire crackled in the hearth, offering warmth against the October chill, but Alistair felt cold nonetheless. His dark brown hair, perfectly combed as always, did nothing to soften the tension etched into his features. At 32, he should have been in his prime, a man secure in his position, his legacy assured. Instead, he felt hollowed out, caught between 2 impossible choices. The door opened without ceremony, and Lord Vincent Hawke entered with the confidence of a man who considered himself indispensable. Vincent was 43, lean and sharp-featured, with greying temples that lent him an air of distinguished authority. He had been Alistair's father's advisor before becoming Alistair's own, a constant presence at Blackwood Manor for more than 2 decades. "Your Grace," Vincent said, his voice carrying that particular tone of concerned efficiency that Alistair had come to dread. "I trust you've had time to review the figures I provided yesterday?" Alistair gestured to the open ledger before him without looking up. "I have." Vincent crossed the Persian rug, his footsteps muffled, and positioned himself across the desk. He remained standing, a subtle assertion of urgency. "Then you understand the gravity of our situation. 6 years of marriage, Your Grace. 6 years without an heir. The estate's future grows more uncertain with each passing season." There it was, the conversation they had been having, in various forms, for the past 2 years. Alistair's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to meet Vincent's gaze. "I am aware of how long I have been married, Vincent. I require no reminder. Forgive me, Your Grace, but someone must speak plainly." Vincent leaned forward, his palms flat against the desk. "Without a son to inherit, the Blackwood name will cease to exist. 300 years of history, of service to the crown, of stewardship over these lands, all of it will pass to your cousin Reginald, who has never set foot on this estate and cares nothing for its people." Alistair's fingers curled around the edge of the ledger. Reginald was a gambling fool who would sell off the estate piecemeal to pay his debts. Every tenant farmer, every household servant, every family who had lived under Blackwood protection for generations would suffer for it. "I am not unaware of the consequences," Alistair said quietly. Vincent straightened, his expression softening into something that might have passed for sympathy. He moved to the side of the desk, his fingers trailing across the stack of estate documents. Alistair had been reviewing property deeds, tenant agreements, investment records. "Of course not. You are a man of duty, Your Grace. You always have been. Which is why we must discuss practical solutions." "Practical solutions." Alistair's voice was flat. "The Duchess is a good woman," Vincent continued, his tone carefully measured. "No one questions her character or her grace, but we must face facts. She cannot give you what you need, what the estate needs." He paused, letting the words settle like stones. "There are options, Your Grace. Dignified options. A quiet dissolution of the marriage. Lady Charlotte would be provided for generously, of course. And you could remarry. A younger woman, from good stock, proven fertility." "Enough." The word cracked through the air like a whip. Vincent fell silent, but Alistair could see he was not deterred. He never was. Alistair pushed back from his desk and stood, walking to the window. The rain had intensified, turning the manicured gardens into a blur of grey and brown. Beyond the grounds, he could just make out the tenant cottages, smoke rising from their chimneys. All of it, Every acre, every soul rested on his shoulders. A memory rose unbidden. Charlotte on their wedding day, standing beside him in the chapel at St. Margaret's. She had been 20 years old, radiant in ivory silk, her pale blue eyes full of hope and love. When she had spoken her vows, her voice had trembled slightly, and he had wanted nothing more than to protect her, to make her happy, to build a life worthy of the trust she had placed in him. 6 years. 6 years of love, of companionship, of quiet moments and shared laughter. 6 years of watching that hope in her eyes gradually dim, replaced by guilt and self-recrimination every month when her courses came. 6 years of doctors and remedies and prayers that went unanswered. "She is my wife," Alistair said, not turning from the window. "I made vows before the church and before all witnesses, for better or worse, in sickness and in health." "Noble sentiments, Your Grace," Vincent replied, and there was something in his voice. Was it impatience? "But the church would grant an annulment under these circumstances. Barrenness is considered grounds. Do not use that word in my presence." Alistair's voice was low, dangerous. Vincent raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Forgive me. I speak only out of concern for the Blackwood legacy. Someone must ensure these interests are properly managed for future generations." His fingers drummed against the edge of the estate inventory, a rhythmic, almost possessive gesture that Alistair noted with a flicker of unease. Future generations, as if Vincent's dedication to the Blackwood name extended beyond his own position, his own comfortable life within these walls. But Alistair dismissed the thought. Vincent had served his father faithfully for years. His loyalty was beyond question, wasn't it? "I have given this matter considerable thought," Alistair said finally, turning to face his advisor. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older than his years. "I understand what is at stake. I understand what duty demands of me." Vincent's expression brightened with anticipation. "Then you will consider—" "No." The single word hung in the air between them. "Your Grace. I will not cast aside my wife like a broken tool, simply because she has not produced the result I desired." Alistair's voice was steady now, hardened by decision. "Charlotte is not a broodmare. She is a woman of intelligence, grace, and dignity. She is my partner, my companion, and I will not betray her. But the estate will pass to Reginald upon my death." Alistair met Vincent's gaze without flinching. "Or perhaps I shall name another heir. There are options beyond divorce and remarriage." Vincent's expression flickered. Something unreadable passed across his features. Disappointment, certainly, but something else as well. Something that made Alistair's instincts prickle with warning. Was it calculation? Ambition? The moment passed too quickly to analyze. "Your Grace," Vincent said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "You cannot simply— The line ends with me, then." Alistair's words were quiet but absolute. Final. "If that is the price of honor, of keeping my vows to the woman I love, then so be it. The Blackwood name has endured for 300 years. That will have to be enough." Vincent stared at him for a long moment, and in that silence, Alistair thought he glimpsed the truth beneath his advisor's mask of concern. But then Vincent bowed, stiff and formal. "As you wish, Your Grace. I am, as always, your humble servant." He withdrew from the study, closing the door with exaggerated care. Alistair remained standing by the window, listening to Vincent's footsteps recede down the corridor. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the manor, Charlotte was likely sitting alone in her chambers, carrying the weight of guilt that should never have been hers to bear. Alistair pressed his palm against the cold glass and closed his eyes. "The line ends with me." The words should have brought relief. Instead, they felt like an epitaph. Chapter 2. Charlotte's Silent Suffering. The sitting room had once been Charlotte's sanctuary. Decorated in soft blues and creams that reminded her of summer skies, it was meant to be a place of peace, a feminine counterpoint to Alistair's darker, more austere study. Now, as she sat by the window with embroidery lying forgotten in her lap, it felt more like a prison, a beautiful, suffocating prison where she could do nothing but watch the last light fade from the October sky. The voices came through the connecting door, muffled but unmistakable. Alistair's study shared a wall with her sitting room, and the old manor's construction allowed sound to travel in ways the architects had never intended. 6 years of marriage, Your Grace. 6 years without an heir. Charlotte's fingers tightened around the embroidery hoop, the needle pricking her thumb. She did not pull it away. The small pain was almost welcome, a distraction from the larger ache that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. The estate's future grows more uncertain with each passing season. She knew Vincent's voice as well as she knew her own. For 6 years, she had heard variations of this same conversation, sometimes through walls, sometimes in pointed silences at dinner, sometimes in the pitying looks of society, matrons who whispered behind their fans at balls and garden parties. The poor Duke, such a handsome man, wasted on a barren wife. Charlotte released the embroidery hoop, letting it fall to her lap. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them flat against the pale blue silk of her afternoon dress. 26 years old, and she felt ancient, hollowed out, a shell of the girl who had married Alistair Blackwood with such hope in her heart. The memories came unbidden, as they always did. Dr. Pemberton's cold hands during examinations that left her feeling exposed and inadequate. There is no obvious impediment, Your Grace. Sometimes these things simply take time. Month after month of hope, that peculiar, desperate hope that came when her courses were late by even a day. And then the crushing disappointment when the blood came anyway. Proof of her failure written in crimson. The pitying looks from Alistair's cousin Margaret. The carefully worded questions from the Dowager Duchess before she passed. Any happy news to share, my dear? Always the same answer. Always the same shame burning in Charlotte's cheeks. She heard Alistair's voice now, low and tight with tension. I will not cast aside my wife like a broken tool. Charlotte stood abruptly, moving away from the window. She could not bear to hear more. Could not bear to hear Alistair defend her out of duty, out of honor, when she knew that she was destroying everything he had worked for, everything his family had built for 3 centuries. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. "Come in," she called, forcing her voice to sound steady. The door opened to reveal Clara Hawke, wrapped in a dove-grey traveling cloak still damp from the rain. At 28, Clara was 2 years Charlotte's senior, with dark auburn hair and warm brown eyes that seemed to see everything. She was Vincent's younger sister, though Charlotte had long since learned not to hold that relation against her. Clara possessed none of her brother's calculating coldness. "Forgive the intrusion," Clara said, pulling off her gloves. "I know I should have sent word, but I was visiting the vicar's wife in the village and thought I might stop for tea." "If you're not engaged, Clara," Charlotte's voice broke slightly on the name. "Of course, please, come in." Clara's expression shifted immediately from polite inquiry to concern. She crossed the room quickly, catching Charlotte's hands in her own. "What's wrong? You look dreadful, forgive me for saying so plainly, but it's true." Charlotte tried to smile, but the expression felt wrong on her face. "I'm perfectly well, just tired." "Charlotte." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. She guided Charlotte back to the settee by the window and sat beside her. "We have been friends for 4 years. I know when you're merely tired and when something is truly wrong." For a moment, Charlotte considered deflecting, offering some pleasantry about the weather or her correspondence or the household accounts, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. "I feel like a failure," she whispered. The admission felt like tearing open a wound. "Like everything I touch turns to disappointment." Clara's grip on her hands tightened. "What has brought this on? Has someone said something cruel?" "No one needs to say anything." Charlotte's laugh was bitter. "The truth speaks for itself, doesn't it? 6 years of marriage, and I have given my husband nothing. No son, no daughter, no future for his family." "Oh, Charlotte." Clara pulled her into an embrace, and Charlotte found herself clinging to her friend like a drowning woman to driftwood. "You are more than your ability to bear children. Surely Alistair knows this." "Does he?" Charlotte pulled back, wiping at her eyes with trembling fingers. "He married me to secure his line, to produce heirs, and I have failed him utterly." "You have not failed anyone," Clara said firmly. "These things are not within our control, and any man worth his salt understands that a wife is a partner, not simply a vessel for producing children." Charlotte wanted to believe her, desperately wanted to believe that Alistair saw her as more than a disappointing investment. But she had seen the way he looked at other men's children at social gatherings, the wistfulness in his eyes. She had felt him pull away from her, inch by inch, over the past 2 years. Not cruelly, never cruelly, but the distance was there nonetheless, growing wider with each passing month. "I don't know what to do," Charlotte admitted. "I don't know how to fix this." Clara was quiet for a moment, her expression troubled. "Some things cannot be fixed, dearest, only endured, but you do not have to endure them alone." They sat together in silence as the last light faded from the sky. Eventually, Clara departed with promises to call again soon, and Charlotte was left alone with her thoughts once more. Her maid, Mary, arrived to help her dress for dinner. The girl was efficient and kind, chattering about household matters as she laced Charlotte's corset and arranged her hair. Charlotte responded mechanically, her mind elsewhere. When Mary held up the mirror so Charlotte could approve her appearance, Charlotte barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her face was pale and drawn, with shadows beneath her pale blue eyes that cosmetics could not quite conceal. She looked like a ghost. Perhaps that was fitting. She felt like a ghost present but not truly there, occupying space but leaving no real mark upon the world. "You look lovely, Your Grace," Mary said with determined cheerfulness. Charlotte managed a thin smile. "Thank you, Mary. That will be all." After Mary departed, Charlotte found she could not bear the thought of going down to dinner. Not yet. She needed air, space, something to silence the voices in her head that whispered of her inadequacy. She wrapped herself in a thick shawl and slipped out through the terrace doors that led to the gardens. The rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and glistening in the gathering twilight. Frost had touched the roses, browning their edges, and the smell of decay mingled with the earthy scent of wet soil. Charlotte walked the gravel paths alone, her slippers crunching on the stones. The gardens stretched out before her, immaculately maintained by an army of gardeners she rarely saw. Everything at Blackwood Manor was maintained to perfection, everything except her. She stopped at the center of the rose garden, where a stone fountain stood silent for the winter. Her reflection wavered in the dark water collected in its basin, a pale, indistinct shape that could have been anyone. Would Alistair be happier without her? The question had haunted her for months now, growing louder with each of Vincent's pointed conversations, each pitying look from society. If she were gone, not dead, she wasn't quite that desperate, but simply gone, Alistair could remarry. He could find a young woman with proven fertility and secure his line. The Blackwood name would continue, the estate would thrive, everyone would be better off. Everyone except her. But what did that matter, if she had already failed in her most fundamental duty? Charlotte's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, pressing flat against the fabric of her dress. Empty. Always empty. No flutter of life, no promise of the future, just the same hollow ache she had carried for 6 years. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the darkening sky, to the silent fountain, to the ghost of the hopeful girl she had once been. "I'm so sorry." The words dissolved into the October evening, unanswered and unheard. Charlotte stood there for a long moment, feeling the cold seep through her shawl and into her bones. Then, with mechanical precision, she turned and walked back toward the manor. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached her chambers, a decision had crystallized in her mind, hard and cold and necessary. She would withdraw, emotionally, if not physically. She would stop hoping, stop hurting, stop allowing herself to be vulnerable to the disappointment that came with every failed month. She would be the perfect duchess in public, gracious, elegant, untouchable. And in private, she would protect what remained of her heart by simply feeling less. It was the only way to survive. Charlotte closed the door to her sitting room and turned the key in the lock. Then, finally alone, she allowed herself to weep quiet, dignified tears that no one would ever see. Outside her window, full darkness had fallen over Blackwood Manor, and somewhere in his study, her husband sat alone, with the weight of impossible choices pressing down upon him. Neither of them knew that the worst was yet to come. Chapter 3. The Return of Lord Edmund Carter. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew Charlotte to her sitting room window on a grey November afternoon. 3 weeks had passed since her decision to withdraw into herself, and she had become quite accomplished at it. She moved through the manor like a porcelain figure, beautiful, fragile, and fundamentally hollow. But now, watching an elegant black carriage pull to a stop before the entrance, she felt the first stirring of something other than numbness. Curiosity, perhaps, or dread. A man emerged, tall and lean, dressed in the kind of expensive tailoring that spoke of London's finest establishments. Even from this distance, Charlotte recognized the easy confidence in his movements, the way he surveyed the manor with an air of casual appraisal. Her breath caught. Edmund Carter. Charlotte's hand flew to her throat, her heart suddenly racing. She had not seen Edmund in 6 years, not since those heady weeks before her engagement to Alistair, when the world had seemed full of possibility, and she had been young enough to believe in fairy tales. She watched as Alistair emerged from the manor to greet their unexpected guest. Even from above, she could see the warmth in her husband's posture, the genuine pleasure of greeting an old acquaintance. Of course, Edmund and Alistair had been at Oxford together. She had forgotten that connection, buried it alongside all the other memories from that complicated time. Charlotte knew she should go down. Propriety demanded it. But her feet remained rooted to the floor as a cascade of memories washed over her. The Thornbury Ball, 6 years ago. Edmund bowing over her hand, his green eyes alight with humour. "Miss Charlotte Ashford, I've heard your wit is as sharp as your beauty is legendary. Dare I hope both rumors are true. Long walks through Hyde Park, his arm steady beneath her hand, conversation flowing as easily as the Serpentine beside them, dancing until dawn, laughing until her sides ached, feeling seen and delighted in. And then Alistair, the Duke of Blackwood, with his dark intensity and unwavering attention, the way he looked at her as though she were the only woman in any room. The choice she had made: rank, security, and yes, love of a different kind, deeper, more serious. Edmund had been summer sunshine. Alistair had been a storm that swept her away. Charlotte pressed her palm against the cool window glass. That girl who had made that choice felt like a stranger now. Where had she gone? That hopeful creature who believed love would be enough. Your Grace, Mary's voice broke through her reverie. His Grace requests your presence in the drawing room. Lord Edmund Carter has arrived. Charlotte turned from the window, her expression carefully neutral. Of course. Help me change, please. Something appropriate for receiving guests. 20 minutes later, dressed in a gown of deep burgundy that brought color to her pale cheeks, Charlotte descended the main staircase. The marble floor of the entrance hall gleamed below her, and she could hear voices from the drawing room, Alistair's measured tones, and another voice, warmer and more animated. Edmund? She paused at the top of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. Her heart lurched in her chest, not with romantic longing, but with something more complicated. Nostalgia for the girl she had been, curiosity about the man he had become, and underneath it all, a creeping sense of guilt for feeling anything at all. Then Edmund appeared in the doorway below, looking up as if he had sensed her presence. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years fell away. His face had matured lines around his eyes now, a certain gravity that hadn't been there before, but his smile was the same. Warm, open, uncomplicated. Lady Charlotte, he said, and his voice carried up the stairs like a melody she had forgotten she knew. You are as lovely as ever. Charlotte descended slowly, aware of her husband appearing behind Edmund, watching. Lord Carter, what an unexpected pleasure. She offered her hand, and Edmund bowed over it with perfect propriety. But when he straightened, she saw concern flicker in his green eyes. He saw too much. He always had. The drawing room was warm despite the grey day outside, a fire crackling in the marble hearth. Charlotte arranged herself on the settee while Alistair and Edmund settled into chairs, and tea was brought. The conversation flowed around her talk of London, of mutual acquaintances, of Edmund's recent travels to the continent. Business on the estate brought me to the area, Edmund was saying. I've purchased a property in Derbyshire, and there were matters requiring my attention. When I realized I was so close to Blackwood Manor, I couldn't resist calling upon old friends. You must stay, Alistair said with genuine warmth. We have ample room, and it's been far too long since we've had proper company. Charlotte noticed how Edmund's gaze kept returning to her, studying her with the attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. She maintained her composure, pouring tea with steady hands, but she could feel his concern like a physical touch. Finally, when Alistair excused himself to speak with his steward about some urgent matter, Edmund moved to sit beside her on the settee, not improperly close, but near enough for private conversation. You seem different, Charlotte, he said quietly, abandoning formality now that they were relatively alone, though a footman remained stationed near the door. Sadder. Is everything quite well? The directness of the question caught her off guard. In 6 years of marriage, no one had asked her that so plainly. Everyone tiptoed around her failure, her inadequacy, offering platitudes or pitying looks but never direct inquiry. I'm perfectly well, she said automatically. No, Edmund said gently. You're not. I may not have seen you in 6 years, but I remember the girl who could make an entire ballroom laugh with a single witty observation, who approached life with such joy. What's happened to her? Charlotte felt something crack inside her carefully constructed walls. People change, Edmund. 6 years is a long time. Not that much. Not unless something has hurt them very badly. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and found only genuine concern in his eyes. No judgment, no expectation, just the easy warmth that had made him such pleasant company all those years ago. Despite herself, Charlotte felt her lips curve into a small smile, the first genuine expression of pleasure she had worn in weeks. You always did have a talent for seeing past pretense, and you always had a talent for deflection, Edmund countered, but his own smile softened the words. But very well, I won't press. I'm simply glad to see you again, even if the circumstances seem to have dimmed your light somewhat. They talked for another quarter hour, falling into an easy rhythm that felt both familiar and strange. Edmund told her of Venice, of the art and music and the peculiar custom of wearing masks during Carnival. Charlotte found herself genuinely engaged, asking questions, even laughing at his descriptions of a gondolier who had sung opera with more enthusiasm than skill. She didn't notice Alistair return until she caught movement from the corner of her eye. He stood in the doorway, and something in his posture made her breath catch. His expression was carefully neutral, but his dark eyes held an intensity that made her chest tighten. How long had he been watching them? Across the room, Vincent Hawke had also materialized, seemingly from nowhere. His sharp features betrayed nothing, but Charlotte saw the way his gaze moved between her and Edmund, calculating, assessing. "Lord Carter," Alistair said, his voice perhaps a shade too controlled. "I've had a room prepared for you. You'll stay a fortnight, I hope. There's much to discuss regarding estate management, and I confess I could use the company." "You're most generous," Edmund said, standing. If he sensed any tension, he didn't show it. "I gratefully accept." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of polite conversation. Vincent engaged Edmund in discussion about his Derbyshire property, asking detailed questions about its size, its income, its prospects. Charlotte noticed how Vincent leaned in, his attention focused, as if filing away every detail. "You must allow me to assist with any estate matters while you're here," Vincent said smoothly. "His Grace and I work quite closely on ensuring the Blackwood interests are properly managed. Perhaps we might extend that expertise to your own holdings?" "That's kind of you," Edmund replied, though Charlotte thought she detected a note of wariness in his voice. Dinner that evening was an elegant affair, but Charlotte barely tasted her food. She was hyper-aware of Alistair at the head of the table, of Edmund seated across from her, of Vincent watching them all with those calculating eyes. The conversation flowed around her politics, the upcoming season in London, speculation about the Queen's health, but Charlotte felt removed from it, as if she were watching a play rather than participating in it. After dinner, as the men retired for port and cigars, Charlotte excused herself early, pleading a headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her temples throbbed, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs. But later, alone in her chambers with the candles extinguished, Charlotte found sleep elusive. She lay in the darkness, listening to the wind rattle the windows, and thought of Edmund's words. What's happened to her? The girl, he remembered, that laughing, hopeful creature, where had she gone? Buried beneath 6 years of failure and shame, and slowly dying hope. But for a few moments that afternoon, talking with Edmund, she had felt a glimmer of that old self, had felt interesting again, valued, seen. The thought filled her with guilt. She was Alistair's wife. Her loyalty belonged to him, regardless of how distant they had become. Charlotte rolled onto her side, pressing her face into the pillow. Tomorrow she would reinforce her walls, would remember her place, would be the proper duchess that circumstances demanded. But tonight, just for tonight, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. Edmund made her feel like herself again, and that was dangerous. In his study 3 floors below, Alistair stood by the window, a glass of brandy forgotten in his hand. The grounds were dark save for the scattered lights from windows, including one in the east wing where Edmund Carter had been installed. Alistair had seen Charlotte's face when she talked with Edmund, had seen her smile, truly smile, in a way she hadn't smiled at him in months, perhaps years. The jealousy that churned in his gut was unfamiliar and unwelcome. He had no right to it. He had failed Charlotte in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had allowed duty and pressure and his own inadequacy to drive a wedge between them. And now another man had walked into his home and accomplished in one afternoon what Alistair hadn't managed in weeks. He had made Charlotte happy. The brandy burned as he finally drank it, but it did nothing to warm the cold knot forming in his chest. In the doorway behind him, unnoticed, Vincent Hawke smiled into the darkness. Chapter 4. Manipulation and Doubt. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the grounds of Blackwood Manor into a watercolor of greys and browns. Charlotte sat in her sitting room on the 4th morning of Edmund's stay, watching fog roll across the gardens like a living thing, when Clara Hawke was announced. "I hope I'm not intruding," Clara said, removing her damp cloak. Her expression was troubled, her usual warmth tempered by concern. "I felt we should speak," Charlotte gestured to the settee. "Of course. You're always welcome, Clara. You know that." They settled into the familiar ritual of tea, but Charlotte could sense her friend's unease. Clara kept glancing toward the door, her fingers fidgeting with her teacup in a way that was entirely unlike her usual composure. "I've noticed Lord Carter is still in residence," Clara finally said, her voice careful. "He seems to have extended his stay." "Alistair invited him to remain a fortnight," Charlotte replied, defensive despite herself. They were friends at Oxford. It's perfectly natural. Charlotte, Clara set down her cup with a decisive click. I must speak plainly, even if it makes me uncomfortable. Be careful, dear friend. My brother seems unusually interested in Lord Carter's stay. Charlotte felt her spine stiffen. What do you mean? Vincent has been. Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. He has been observing you and Lord Carter together, taking note of your interactions, and yesterday I saw him in private conversation with Lord Carter in a way that seemed calculating. Clara, you're being dramatic. Your brother is Alistair's advisor. He's naturally interested in any guest who... My brother is interested in power. Clara interrupted, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He always has been, and lately I've noticed him paying particular attention to matters that should not concern an advisor. Estate inventories, property deeds, the line of succession. She leaned forward, her brown eyes intense. Charlotte, I love my brother, but I know him. Whatever he's planning, it is not for your benefit or the Duke's. Charlotte wanted to dismiss her friend's concerns, but something in Clara's earnestness gave her pause. What would you have me do? Simply be cautious. With Lord Carter, with Vincent, with... Clara's voice softened. With your own heart. I've seen how Lord Carter looks at you, and I've seen how you smile when he's near a smile I haven't seen in a very long time. Heat rose to Charlotte's cheeks. Edmund is a friend, nothing more. I believe you, Clara said gently. But intentions and appearances are not always the same thing, and Vincent is very good at manipulating appearances. After Clara departed, her warnings lingered like the fog outside Charlotte's windows, formless but oppressive, impossible to ignore. In his study, Alistair stared at the ledger before him without truly seeing it. Vincent stood across the desk, his voice a constant drone that had become almost unbearable over the past 4 days. I merely point out what anyone with eyes can see. Your Grace, Vincent was saying, Lady Charlotte seems remarkably animated in Lord Carter's company. One might even say, revived. Your point, Vincent. Alistair's voice was ice. My point is that perhaps she regrets her choice of husband. Vincent's words were carefully measured, poisonous in their precision. 6 years is a long time to realize one has made a mistake. Lord Carter was a suitor before you, was he not? Perhaps she wonders what life might have been like had she chosen differently. Alistair's hands curled into fists beneath the desk. Charlotte is my wife. Her honor is beyond question. Of course, Vincent said smoothly. I speak merely of emotional attachment. Surely you've noticed how she brightens in his presence, how she laughs at his stories. When was the last time she laughed that way with you, Your Grace? The words hit their mark because they were true. Alistair had noticed. Every smile Charlotte gave Edmund felt like a small death, a reminder of how thoroughly he had failed to make his own wife happy. The estate documents, Alistair said abruptly, desperate to change the subject. Why have you been taking inventory of the paintings in the gallery? The silverware? Vincent didn't miss a beat. Proper documentation, Your Grace. Should anything happen, should you decide to make changes to the succession, we need accurate records of all assets. It's simply good stewardship. Something about the explanation felt wrong, but Alistair was too exhausted to pursue it. He waved Vincent away with a dismissive hand. Leave me. I have work to do. After Vincent departed, Alistair sat in the growing darkness, not bothering to light additional candles. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. He was losing her. Perhaps he had already lost her. And the worst part was that he couldn't even blame her for seeking comfort elsewhere, even if that comfort remained innocent. He had driven her away with his silence, his distance, his inability to simply tell her that she was enough. Alistair reached for the brandy decanter and poured himself a generous measure. It was barely noon, but what did it matter? He had already failed at everything that truly counted. Charlotte found Edmund in the conservatory the next morning, examining an exotic orchid that had been a gift from a botanist friend of Alistair's. The glass walls were fogged with condensation, creating a warm, private world within the larger coldness of the manor. Good morning, she said, and was rewarded with Edmund's warm smile. Charlotte, I was hoping you'd join me. Look at this specimen. Have you ever seen anything so delicate yet resilient? They fell into easy conversation as they walked among the winter plants. Edmund had a gift for making everything interesting. He could tell a story about a simple merchant in Florence that would have her laughing, or explain the architectural innovations of Venetian bridges in a way that made her genuinely curious. You should travel, Edmund said as they paused by a window overlooking the foggy grounds. You would love Venice. The light there, it's unlike anywhere else in the world. And the art. You always had such refined taste. I remember you could spend hours in galleries." "That was a long time ago," Charlotte said softly. "Not so long that you've completely changed." Edmund's voice was gentle, though I confess I do see differences. The Charlotte I knew was confident, witty, absolutely carefree. She would have dragged me through every gallery in London, arguing about brushwork and composition. Charlotte felt an ache in her chest. That girl, she had no responsibilities, no expectations weighing on her. "Responsibilities," Edmund repeated, something sad in his tone. "Yes, marriage brings those, doesn't it?" He hesitated, then added carefully, "Are you happy, Charlotte?" The question hung in the humid air between them. Charlotte opened her mouth to give the expected answer. Of course, she was happy. She was a duchess. She had everything any woman could want, but the words wouldn't come. "I don't know," she whispered instead. "I don't know if I remember what happy feels like anymore." Edmund's hand moved as if to touch her arm, then fell away. "You deserve happiness. You deserve to be cherished for who you are, not mourned for what you cannot provide." The words were too close to her deepest wounds. Charlotte turned away, blinking back sudden tears. "I should go. This isn't. It's not appropriate." Charlotte, but she was already walking away, her footsteps quick on the stone floor. Yet the next day, she found herself seeking him out again. And the day after that, they walked the grounds despite the fog, properly chaperoned by Mary. They discussed books in the library, their heads bent over volumes of poetry. They played cards in the drawing room while Alistair worked late in his study. With Edmund, Charlotte felt like a person again, not a failure, not a disappointment, just Charlotte, interesting, valued, seen. She knew it was dangerous, knew she was walking a line that could easily be crossed, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. The loneliness she had lived with for so long had teeth, and Edmund's friendship was a balm against the constant ache. She remained utterly faithful to her marriage vows. Never once did she allow impropriety, but emotionally, she was beginning to realize just how starved she had been for simple human connection. Dinner that evening was a torturous affair. 4 courses of near silence, punctuated only by forced pleasantries about the weather and the quality of the pheasant. Alistair sat at the head of the table like a statue, speaking only when directly addressed. Charlotte picked at her food, hyper-aware of Edmund across from her, and Vincent watching them all with those calculating eyes. "The fog should clear by tomorrow," Vincent observed. "Excellent hunting weather, if you're interested, Lord Carter." "Perhaps," Edmund replied noncommittally. The silence stretched again, oppressive and thick. After dinner, the men retired to the billiards room, while Charlotte excused herself. But she had forgotten her shawl, and when she returned to retrieve it from the drawing room, she heard voices from the billiards room. The door had been left slightly ajar. She shouldn't listen. She knew she shouldn't. But something in Vincent's tone made her pause in the hallway. "Considering changes," Vincent was saying. "The situation is becoming untenable. No heir. A wife who clearly finds comfort elsewhere. You speak very freely about your employer's private matters." Edmund's voice, cautious. "I speak as a man who has served this family for 20 years and wishes to see it thrive. If circumstances were to shift, Lord Carter, a man positioned correctly, could benefit greatly. Lady Charlotte is quite fond of you." A pause. Charlotte held her breath. "What exactly are you suggesting, Hawke?" "Nothing improper. Simply that loyalty has its rewards. Keep the lady company. Make her feel valued. I'll handle the rest. When the time comes, for certain, changes. Your cooperation would be remembered, generously." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding. Further down the hallway, hidden in a shadowed alcove, Clara Hawke stood frozen, her face pale with horror. She had heard enough. Not everything, but enough to confirm her worst fears about her brother's machinations. Their eyes met across the dim corridor, a moment of shared shock and understanding. Then Clara turned and fled toward the servants' stairs, and Charlotte hurried to her chambers before she could be discovered. An hour later, Alistair finally left his study, exhausted and seeking the solace of his chambers. But as he passed the library, he heard laughter, genuine, unrestrained laughter. He stopped, drawn by the sound like a moth to flame. Through the partially open door, he saw them, Charlotte and Edmund, seated together on the sofa, a book open between them. Charlotte's head was tilted back in laughter at something Edmund had read, her pale blue eyes bright with mirth. As Alistair watched, frozen in the doorway, Charlotte reached out to turn the page, her hand briefly touching Edmund's arm, an innocent gesture, but somehow unbearably intimate. Alistair felt something crack inside his chest, that laugh, that light in her eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he had inspired either. Edmund said something else, and Charlotte laughed again, leaning slightly toward him in a way that spoke of comfort and ease and trust. Alistair turned away before they could see him, walking blindly down the corridor. His study. He needed his study. And more brandy. Much more brandy. Behind him, in the library, Charlotte and Edmund continued reading, unaware of the watching eyes that had just condemned them both. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. For 3 days, Alistair had been a ghost in his own home. He took breakfast in his study before Charlotte rose, worked through luncheon, and returned to his desk after dinner until the small hours of the morning. Charlotte knew because she had taken to listening for his footsteps in the corridor. The heavy tread that had once brought her comfort now only amplified her loneliness. On the third night, she could bear it no longer. The clock in her sitting room had just chimed midnight when Charlotte rose from her chair, still dressed in her evening gown of midnight blue silk. She had dismissed Mary hours ago, unable to face the sympathetic looks her maid tried so hard to hide. Now she stood before the connecting door to Alistair's chambers, her hand trembling as it hovered over the handle. Rain lashed against the windows, driven by a bitter November wind that rattled the glass in its frames. The sound matched the storm building inside her chest, years of silence, of swallowed hurt, of careful pretense finally reaching a breaking point. She turned the handle and stepped through. Alistair stood by his own window, still fully dressed save for his jacket, a glass of brandy in his hand. He didn't turn at her entrance, but his shoulders tensed, and she knew he had heard her. "Alistair." Her voice was steadier than she expected. "We need to speak. It's late, Charlotte." His voice was hollow, distant. "Whatever it is, can wait until morning." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "It cannot wait. Nothing can wait any longer. You cannot even bear to look at me anymore, can you?" That made him turn. In the lamplight, his face was haggard, dark circles beneath his eyes speaking of sleepless nights. But it was the look in those eyes, pain and anger, and something that looked almost like jealousy that made her breath catch. "And you," he said, his voice low and dangerous, seemed perfectly content with Carter's company instead. Charlotte felt as if she'd been slapped. "What? Don't pretend ignorance. I've seen you together. I've heard you laugh with him, seen you smile at him, watched you seek him out day after day." Alistair's grip tightened on his glass. "You light up in his presence in a way you haven't with me in years. How dare you?" Charlotte's voice rose, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. "How dare you accuse me of impropriety when you've spent 3 years pulling away from me, avoiding my presence, treating me like a piece of furniture that's failed to perform its function? That's not." "It is," she was shouting now, propriety abandoned. "Do you think I don't see it? Don't feel it? Every time Vincent speaks of heirs in your presence and you say nothing. Every time you work late to avoid sharing a meal with me. Every time you look at other men's children with that expression of longing and loss. You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Charlotte's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "Explain why my husband has become a stranger. Explain why I feel more alone in my marriage than I ever did as a spinster. Explain why I'm made to feel like a failure every single day of my life." "I never meant," Alistair set down his glass with a sharp crack. "I never wanted you to feel that way." "But I do." Charlotte's shoulders shook with the force of her sobs. "I know I failed you. I see it in every disappointed look, every time you turn away from me, every time Vincent mentions heirs in my presence and you remain silent. I see it, Alistair. I live with it every moment of every day." The anguish in her voice seemed to pierce through Alistair's defenses. His expression crumbled, and he took a step toward her. "Charlotte, you haven't failed me. You could never—" "Then why?" Her voice was raw, broken. "Why does it feel like I'm being punished for something I cannot control? Why have you abandoned me when I needed you most?" "Because I didn't know how to help you." The words exploded from Alistair with the force of long-suppressed truth. "I didn't know how to ease your pain without admitting my own. I didn't know how to tell you that watching you suffer was destroying me, that every month when hope died in your eyes, it died in mine as well." Charlotte stared at him, stunned into silence. Alistair ran his hands through his hair, his composure completely shattered. "You think I care about heirs? About preserving some bloodline that has brought me nothing but duty and obligation and suffocating expectations?" His laugh was bitter. "I never cared about heirs as much as I cared about you, but I didn't know how to tell you that duty felt like a noose around my neck, that every time Vincent spoke of divorce and remarriage, I wanted to throw him out of this house, that the thought of losing you was more terrifying than losing the estate, the title, everything. Then why didn't you fight for us?" Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. For me, because I thought I was doing what was right. Alistair's hands trembled as he reached toward her, then fell to his sides. What everyone expected, what a duke should do. Put duty first. Secure the succession, sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good. His voice broke. I thought enduring the pain in silence was noble. I thought protecting you from my own struggles was the honorable choice. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire in the hearth. Do you know what it's like? To feel like you're the obstacle between someone you love and everything they're supposed to be? To watch yourself become the problem that needs solving? You were never the problem. Wasn't I? Charlotte's laugh was hollow. A wife who cannot give her husband an heir. A duchess who cannot secure the succession. Society has very clear words for women like me, Alistair. Barren, defective, useless. Stop. Alistair closed the distance between them in 3 strides. Don't use those words. Don't ever use those words about yourself. Why not? They're true. Charlotte looked up at him, her pale blue eyes swimming with tears. I've been considering leaving. The color drained from Alistair's face. What? Not with Edmund, she said quickly. Not with anyone. Just leaving, retiring to the country, freeing you to do what everyone says you must do, find a wife who can give you children, someone who isn't broken. You're not broken. Alistair's voice was fierce. Charlotte, you're not broken. This situation is broken. Society's expectations are broken. I am broken for letting those expectations poison what we had. His hands moved to grip her shoulders, his touch desperate. Please don't leave. Please. I know I've failed you. I know I've been absent when you needed me most. But please, give me a chance to make this right. How? Charlotte's voice was anguished. How do we make this right when the fundamental problem remains? I still cannot give you children. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. Alistair's grip tightened. I've watched you laugh with Carter, watched you come alive in his presence, and I've realized something. I didn't fail you because you couldn't conceive. I failed you because I let duty and expectation blind me to what truly mattered. I stopped being your husband. I stopped being your partner. I let you bear the weight of disappointment alone when I should have been standing beside you, telling society to go hang itself. Charlotte searched his face, looking for truth in his words. Then why didn't you fight for us? Why did you let Vincent poison your mind with talk of divorce and duty? Because I'm a coward. The admission seemed to cost him everything. Because I convinced myself that suffering in noble silence was better than admitting I was drowning, that I was terrified of losing you, of failing my family, of being the duke who let 300 years of history die. I thought if I could just endure it, if I could just maintain the facade of control, everything would somehow work itself out. His voice dropped to a whisper. I thought I was doing what was right, what everyone expected of me. And what about what I needed? Charlotte's voice broke. What about what we needed? I know. Alistair's own eyes were wet now, tears tracking down his face. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so desperately sorry. They stood there, barely a foot apart, years of pain and miscommunication hanging between them like a physical barrier. Outside, the rain continued its assault, matching the tears that streamed down both their faces. Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest, not resolution, not forgiveness, but a small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. She saw the truth in Alistair's tears, in the trembling of his hands, in the raw anguish written across his features. He was suffering too. Perhaps he always had been. But knowing that didn't erase the years of loneliness, didn't heal the wounds that had been left to fester. Understanding was not the same as healing. Alistair reached for her hand, tentative, as if afraid she might recoil. Charlotte let him take it, felt his fingers close around hers, warm, solid, familiar. For a moment, they stood connected, the silence between them heavy with all the words they had failed to speak for so long. I don't want to lose you, Alistair whispered. Charlotte looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. She saw the man she had married, the intensity, the passion, the vulnerability he so rarely showed. But she also saw the years of distance, the nights spent alone, the slow erosion of trust. Then why does it feel like you already have? She asked softly. The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Alistair's grip tightened on her hand, as if he could physically prevent her from slipping away. But Charlotte gently extracted her fingers from his, the loss of contact painful for them both. I can't do this tonight, she said, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I can't. I need to think, to breathe, to... Her voice broke again. I just need space. Charlotte, please." She held up a hand, forestalling whatever he might say. "Just for tonight. Let me have tonight." Alistair nodded slowly, defeat written across his features. "Of course, whatever you need." Charlotte turned toward the door to her dressing room, the small chamber that connected her sitting room to Alistair's bedroom. She paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "Edmund is simply a friend. Nothing more. He reminds me of who I used to be, before all of this broke me, but I have never been unfaithful to you. Not in deed, not in thought, not in my heart." "I know," Alistair said quietly. "I've always known. I couldn't bear to see you happy with someone else when I had failed so completely to make you happy myself." Charlotte closed her eyes against a fresh wave of tears. "The tragedy, Alistair, is that you could have made me happy. You did make me happy, once upon a time. We simply forgot how to talk to each other, how to be honest about our pain, instead of hiding it away like some shameful secret." She stepped through the doorway, then paused once more. "The door will be closed tonight, but not locked." It was the smallest of olive branches, but Alistair grasped at it like a drowning man. "Thank you." Charlotte nodded once, then closed the door softly behind her. She leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the cold floor, her expensive silk gown pooling around her like a deflated balloon. Through the wood, she could hear Alistair moving the clink of the brandy decanter, heavy footsteps, and then silence. In his room, Alistair stood staring at the closed door. "Not locked," she had said. "Not locked," and wondered how something so simple could feel like both condemnation and hope. He pressed his palm flat against the wood, imagining Charlotte on the other side, as broken and lost as he was. "I love you," he whispered to the door, knowing she couldn't hear. "I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it." The rain continued to fall, and in their separate chambers, both Duke and Duchess wept for what they had lost, what they had broken, and what they might, if they could find the courage, still manage to save. Chapter 6. Temptation and Distance. The breakfast room was oppressively silent. Charlotte sat at one end of the long mahogany table, pushing eggs around her plate, without eating. At the opposite end, Alistair stared at his untouched coffee, the newspaper before him unread. Between them stretched 12 feet of polished wood and 6 years of accumulated hurt. Edmund entered with his characteristic energy, then stopped short, reading the tension in the air like words on a page. His green eyes moved between them, assessing. "Good morning," he said carefully, taking a seat midway between them, a diplomat trying to bridge a chasm. "Good morning, Lord Carter," Charlotte replied, her voice carefully modulated. Alistair merely nodded, not looking up from his newspaper. The silence returned, broken only by the clink of silverware and the ticking of the mantel clock. Edmund made a valiant attempt at conversation, commenting on the weather, mentioning a letter from London, but neither Charlotte nor Alistair offered more than monosyllabic responses. Finally, Alistair stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Forgive me. Estate business requires my attention." He didn't look at Charlotte as he strode from the room. Edmund watched him go, then turned to Charlotte with undisguised concern. "What happened?" Charlotte set down her fork with trembling fingers. "Nothing that can be mended over breakfast conversation." She managed a wan smile. "Please, tell me more about your letter. I could use the distraction." Over the following days, a pattern emerged that felt like slow torture. Alistair left before dawn, riding out to inspect tenant farms and supervise drainage projects that suddenly required his urgent attention. He returned long after dinner, closeting himself in his study with Vincent and ledgers and brandy. Charlotte caught glimpses of him in corridors, haggard, exhausted, avoiding her gaze. She told herself it was for the best. They both needed distance to heal. But distance felt remarkably like abandonment. Edmund, by contrast, was always present, always attentive, always ready with a sympathetic ear or a diverting story. On the third day of Alistair's conspicuous absence, Edmund suggested an outing to the village. "The fresh air will do you good," he said. "You're growing pale as a ghost, Charlotte." Mary accompanied them as chaperone, trailing a respectful distance behind as they walked through the December cold. The village was preparing for Christmas wreaths on doors, the smell of pine and cinnamon drifting from cottages. Charlotte found herself actually noticing the world around her for the first time in days. "There's a bookshop here I've been meaning to visit," Edmund said, guiding her toward a tidy establishment with frost-painted windows. "The proprietor supposedly has an excellent collection of poetry." Inside, surrounded by the comforting smell of leather and paper, Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest. Edmund engaged the elderly proprietor in conversation while Charlotte browsed the shelves, running her fingers over spines, reading titles, feeling almost like herself again. Not a failed duchess, not a disappointment, just Charlotte, who loved books and poetry and intellectual conversation. "I bought you something," Edmund said when they emerged an hour later. He handed her a small, wrapped package. "Edmund, you shouldn't. Just a small volume of Wordsworth. I remember you were fond of his work." His smile was gentle. "Consider it a gift between old friends." Charlotte clutched the package to her chest, absurdly touched by the gesture. When was the last time someone had given her something simply because they thought it would make her happy? As they walked back toward the manor, Edmund began to speak of his own struggles carefully, as if testing her reaction. His father's debts, inherited along with a crumbling estate. The pressure to marry well, to restore the family fortunes. The loneliness of duty without love. "I sometimes think," he said quietly, "that we're all prisoners of expectation, trapped by what others think we should be, should do, should want." Charlotte found herself nodding. Yes, exactly that. Their shared understanding created a dangerous intimacy, the recognition that they were both casualties of a system that valued bloodlines over happiness, duty over desire. The following afternoon, Charlotte found Edmund in the conservatory, examining a winter rose that had somehow managed to bloom despite the cold. The glass walls were fogged with condensation, creating a private world. "Charlotte," Edmund turned to her with a smile that faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" "Everything," she said simply. "Nothing. I don't know anymore." Edmund moved closer, his expression filled with concern. Then, very gently, he took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady, and Charlotte found herself frozen not by desire, but by the simple human comfort of touch. "You deserve to be happy, Charlotte," Edmund said quietly. "To be cherished, not just endured. To be seen as a woman, not merely as a vessel for producing heirs." Charlotte pulled her hand away as if burned, stepping back. "Edmund, don't. I'm sorry. I've overstepped." But he didn't look sorry. His green eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But I can't help thinking. I've always wondered what would have happened if I'd proposed first, if I'd had the courage to ask for your hand before Blackwood swept you away. But you didn't," Charlotte said, her voice shaking. "And I made my choice. I love my husband." "Do you?" Edmund's question was gentle but devastating. "Or do you love the idea of what he should have been, what your marriage should have been?" He took a step closer, though he didn't touch her again. "Does he love you, Charlotte? Or does he love the idea of what you should have been, the perfect duchess who could give him perfect heirs?" The words hit like physical blows because they echoed her own darkest fears. Charlotte wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the humid warmth of the conservatory. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Perhaps not, but it's honest." Edmund's voice softened. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to cause you pain. I only want you to know that there are other possibilities. Other futures. You don't have to live like this, walking on eggshells, apologizing for something that isn't your fault, watching yourself diminish day by day." Charlotte turned away, her vision blurred with tears. "I should go." "Charlotte, wait." But she was already fleeing, her footsteps quick on the stone floor. That evening, after a silent dinner where Alistair barely acknowledged her presence, Charlotte retreated to the library. She needed the comfort of books, of familiar words, of anything that might quiet the chaos in her mind. She was curled in a chair by the fire, Wordsworth's poetry open but unread in her lap, when Edmund found her. "I apologize for this afternoon," he said from the doorway. "May I come in?" Charlotte nodded, too tired to send him away. Edmund settled into the chair opposite hers, the fire crackling between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Edmund leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Charlotte, I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Something in his tone made her heart begin to race. "Edmund, please." He held up a hand. "I've thought about this carefully. I know what I'm about to propose is unconventional, perhaps even shocking, but I believe it may be the solution to both our problems." Charlotte's fingers tightened on the book. "What are you talking about? Come with me." The words hung in the air, impossible and tempting. "Not as anything scandalous. I would marry you properly, once your situation is resolved. Once you're free of this marriage that brings you nothing but pain." Charlotte stared at him, shocked into silence. Edmund continued quickly, as if afraid she might flee before he finished. "I have a modest estate in Derbyshire. Nothing grand, but comfortable, peaceful. We could live quietly, away from society's cruelty, away from the constant judgment and expectation. You could be yourself again, the woman you were before all this broke you." "Edmund," You can't be serious." "I am entirely serious." He leaned forward. "I know this seems sudden, but I've watched you these past weeks, seen your suffering, and I cannot stand by and do nothing. You deserve happiness, Charlotte. You deserve a life where you're valued for who you are, not mourned for what you cannot provide." Charlotte felt as if she were drowning. Part of her, the desperate, lonely part that had been slowly dying inside her marriage, heard his words like a lifeline. Escape, freedom, a chance to start over, away from failure and disappointment and the suffocating weight of duty. But another part of her, the part that had loved Alistair on their wedding day, that still loved him despite everything, recoiled from the suggestion. I need time," she heard herself say, "to think. I understand." Edmund rose, moving to stand before her chair. "Take all the time you need. But know this, Charlotte, the offer is genuine. I care for you. I always have. And I believe I could make you happy in a way that Blackwood cannot." After he left, Charlotte sat frozen in her chair, her mind spinning. She knew rationally, logically, that the answer had to be no. She was married. She had made vows. She loved Alistair, despite the distance between them. But the temptation Edmund offered wasn't really about him at all. It was about escape, about the possibility of a life where she wouldn't wake up every day feeling like a failure, where she could be enough, just as she was. The thought terrified her because for one dangerous moment, she found it appealing. Upstairs, Alistair was pulling on his coat to ride out again, always again when his valet cleared his throat nervously. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but I thought you should know. Lord Carter and Her Grace were alone in the library just now. Private conversation, it seemed." Alistair's hands stilled on his buttons. "How long?" "Near to half an hour, Your Grace." Jealousy and fear crashed over Alistair like a physical wave. Half an hour, alone. In the library where they had laughed together, where Charlotte had smiled at Edmund with a warmth she no longer offered her own husband, he abandoned his plans for the evening ride and headed toward the East Wing instead, where Edmund's guest quarters were located. His footsteps were heavy, purposeful, each one driving home the truth he had been avoiding. He was losing her, if he hadn't already lost her completely. He knocked on Edmund's door with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. Edmund opened it, unsurprised. "Blackwood, I wondered when you'd come. We need to talk." Alistair didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past Edmund into the room. "About your intentions regarding my wife." Edmund closed the door carefully, then turned to face him. In the lamplight, his expression was unreadable. "My intentions are honorable." "Honorable?" Alistair's laugh was bitter. "You call it honorable to pursue another man's wife?" "I call it honorable to offer happiness to a woman who is clearly miserable." Edmund's tone remained calm, which only inflamed Alistair's anger further. "Tell me, Blackwood, when was the last time you made your wife smile? When was the last time you looked at her with something other than guilt and disappointment?" "How dare you? How dare I speak the truth?" Edmund's composure cracked slightly. "I've known Charlotte for years. I knew her before you, knew the vibrant, joyful woman she was, and I've watched her wilt under the weight of your expectations, your disappointment, your inability to value her for anything beyond her capacity to produce heirs. You know nothing about my marriage." "I know enough." Edmund moved to pour himself a drink, offering one to Alistair, who refused curtly. "I know that she deserves better than a husband who avoids her presence, better than a life spent apologizing for something that isn't her fault. And you think you can give her better?" Alistair's voice was dangerous now. "You, with your debts and your crumbling estate and your convenient timing?" Something flickered in Edmund's expression, guilt, perhaps, or calculation. "My financial situation has no bearing on my feelings for Charlotte." "Doesn't it? How convenient that you've suddenly rediscovered your affection for her just when you need to marry well." Alistair took a step closer. "What did Vincent promise you, Carter? Money? A position? Help with those debts?" Edmund's face hardened. "You're grasping at shadows, Blackwood." "Am I?" Alistair could see he'd hit a nerve. "Vincent has been remarkably interested in your stay here, remarkably encouraging of your friendship with my wife. One might almost think he had an agenda. Whatever Vincent's motivations, mine are my own." Edmund set down his glass with controlled precision. "I care for Charlotte. I always have. And yes, I've offered her an alternative to the misery you've created for her. If that makes me a villain in your eyes, so be it. You've proposed to my wife." It wasn't a question. Edmund didn't deny it. "I've offered her a choice, something you seem incapable of giving her the freedom to be valued for who she is, not punished for what she cannot provide." Alistair's control snapped. He grabbed Edmund's collar, slamming him back against the wall. "She is my wife, mine, and I will not let you steal her away with pretty words and false promises." Edmund didn't fight back, but his eyes held Alistair's steadily. "You can't steal what's already been abandoned, Blackwood. Charlotte has been alone in your marriage for years. I'm simply offering her a way out. Get out." Alistair released him roughly. "Out of my house. I want you gone by morning." "Gladly." Edmund straightened his shirt, his expression cold now. "But know this, the offer stands. When Charlotte realizes you cannot give her what she needs, when she finally accepts that your marriage is a prison rather than a partnership, I'll be waiting. And next time, she might accept." Alistair wanted to hit him, wanted to wipe that confident expression off his face, but violence would solve nothing. Instead, he turned and stalked from the room, his hands clenched into fists. In the dark hallway, he stopped, pressing his fist against the wall as Edmund's words echoed in his mind. "You cannot give her what she needs. Your marriage is a prison. She's been alone for years." Every accusation was true, every word a knife in his chest because he had done this. He had created this situation through his silence, his distance, his cowardice in the face of duty and expectation. And now he might lose her entirely. Not because she didn't love him, but because he had failed to show her that he loved her more than any legacy, any title, any expectation society might place upon them. Alistair pressed his forehead against the cold wall and wondered if it was already too late to save what remained of his marriage, if Charlotte would choose escape over fighting for what they had once shared. Tomorrow, Edmund would leave, but the damage was done. The offer had been made, and Charlotte, lonely and hurting and desperate for any validation, now had an alternative to consider. Alistair remained in that dark hallway long into the night, wrestling with the knowledge that he was losing the only thing that had ever truly mattered to him and that he had no one to blame but himself. Chapter 7. Clara's Revelation. Charlotte stood at her sitting room window as dawn broke over Blackwood Manor, watching Edmund's carriage disappear down the tree-lined drive. The December morning was bitter cold, frost glittering on every surface like scattered diamonds. She pressed her palm against the icy glass, her breath fogging the pain. He was gone. She felt relief profound and immediate, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. But underneath the relief lurked something more complicated. Doubt, perhaps. Or regret for what his departure represented. The closing of a door she had never truly intended to walk through, yet had found strangely comforting to know existed. Edmund's proposal had been impossible, of course. She had known it the moment the words left his lips. She loved Alistair despite everything, despite the distance and pain and accumulated hurt. The marriage might be broken, but it wasn't beyond repair. At least, she hoped it wasn't. But the temptation had been real, the desire to escape, to start fresh, to stop being the problem that needed solving that had been desperately, dangerously real. Charlotte turned from the window, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. She had not slept. After Edmund's departure had been arranged, Alistair's terse announcement at breakfast, Edmund's stiff bow, the careful avoidance of her eyes, she had retreated to her chambers and spent the night staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with impossible choices and unanswerable questions. Now, in the grey morning light, she felt hollowed out, empty, as if all the emotion of the past weeks had finally drained away, leaving nothing but exhaustion. A knock at the door made her start. "Come in," she called, expecting Mary with breakfast. Instead, Clara Hawke entered, and Charlotte's breath caught at her appearance. Clara's face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest with white-knuckled hands. "Clara?" Charlotte moved toward her friend immediately. "What's wrong? What's happened?" "I need to speak with you." Clara's voice trembled. "Privately. It's urgent." Charlotte quickly checked that the corridor was empty, then closed the door. "Of course. Sit down. You look dreadful. Shall I ring for tea?" "No. No tea." Clara moved to the settee but didn't sit, pacing instead like a caged animal. "Charlotte, I must tell you something about my brother. I know he's been manipulating this entire situation." Charlotte felt ice settle in her stomach. "What do you mean?" Clara finally sat, placing the portfolio on her lap with trembling hands. "Do you remember when I warned you to be careful? When I said Vincent seemed unusually interested in Lord Carter's stay?" "Yes. I've been watching him since then, observing, and what I've discovered." Clara's voice broke. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, composing herself. "Charlotte, my brother is not the man you think he is. He's not the man Alistair thinks he is. Clara, you're frightening me." "Good. You should be frightened." Clara opened the portfolio with shaking hands. 3 weeks ago, I began investigating Vincent's activities. I know how he works. I've seen him manipulate situations before. when we were younger. He has a gift for it, for positioning himself to benefit from others' misfortunes. She pulled out a letter, the paper fine quality, the handwriting unmistakably Vincent's. This is correspondence to Lord Carter, dated October, 2 weeks before he arrived at Blackwood Manor. Charlotte took the letter, her heart pounding. She read, "My dear Carter, I trust this letter finds you well, though I suspect your financial difficulties continue to press upon you. I may have a solution that could benefit us both. There is a situation developing at Blackwood Manor that requires delicate handling. Her Grace, the Duchess, finds herself in a most unfortunate position, unable to provide the heir that duty demands. His Grace grows increasingly troubled by this failure. You were once close to Lady Charlotte, were you not? Before her marriage? I wonder if you might consider a visit to the area. Purely social, of course. Old friends reuniting. Her Grace has been quite isolated of late, and I believe she would welcome familiar company. There may be opportunities for a man of discretion who finds himself in the right place at the right time. We should discuss this further. I remain, as always, interested in mutually beneficial arrangements." Charlotte's hands trembled as she lowered the letter. He invited Edmund here, deliberately. There's more. Clara handed her another document, a financial ledger showing a substantial loan from Vincent to Edmund Carter, dated the week before Edmund's arrival. He bought his cooperation, paid off Edmund's most pressing debts in exchange for, what? Playing the charming suitor? Making you feel valued? Creating the appearance of impropriety? Charlotte felt sick. Edmund knew. He was working with Vincent from the beginning? I believe Edmund's feelings were genuine, Clara said carefully. But yes, Vincent manipulated his presence here, used his financial desperation to position him as a threat to your marriage. Why? Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. Why would Vincent do this? Clara pulled out more documents, spreading them across the settee between them. Because he wants the Blackwood fortune. He's been planning this for months, perhaps years. Charlotte stared at the papers before her. A draft legal document proposing the adoption of Vincent's 12-year-old son as Blackwood heir, correspondence with various nobles, each letter carefully worded to spread doubt about Charlotte's adequacy as a duchess. Estate transfer documents, partially completed, awaiting only Alistair's signature. And then, the most damning evidence of all, a letter from Vincent to his wife, dated just 2 weeks prior. My dearest, events progress as planned. His Grace grows more desperate daily, and her Grace more isolated. Carter plays his role admirably, the charming friend who reminds her of happier times. The emotional distance between husband and wife widens with each passing day. If all continues as expected, Blackwood will be forced to accept the inevitable. Divorce, adoption of our dear William as his heir, and the positioning of our family to control the Blackwood interests during the boy's minority. Within the year, we shall have what we've worked toward for so long. The Blackwood fortune, the estate, the title's influence, all effectively ours to manage. Remain patient, my love. Victory is within reach. Charlotte read the letter twice, her hands shaking with fury. He wanted Alistair to divorce me, to adopt his son, to give Vincent control of everything. Yes. Clara's voice was thick with tears. He's been poisoning your marriage for years, Charlotte. Every comment about heirs, every suggestion of divorce, every manipulation designed to make you both feel inadequate and isolated. He wanted to destroy your relationship so completely that Alistair would have no choice but to turn to him for a solution. His solution being Vincent's own son as heir. Charlotte's voice was cold now, the shock giving way to rage. Giving Vincent control of the Blackwood estate through a 12-year-old boy, he would effectively become Duke in all but name. And I suspect, given enough time, he would find ways to absorb the Blackwood wealth entirely. Clara wiped at her tears. He's my brother, Charlotte, my own blood, but what he's done to you, to your marriage, to his Grace, it's unconscionable. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let him destroy you both for his own ambition. Charlotte stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, she could see the grounds spreading out in their winter bareness, and beyond, the estate that had been in Alistair's family for 300 years. Vincent had been willing to destroy all of it, her marriage, Alistair's peace, her own sense of self-worth for money and power. How long have you been investigating? Charlotte asked. 3 weeks. Since the night I overheard him speaking with Edmund in the billiards room. I couldn't hear specifics, but the tone. I knew something was wrong. So I began searching his study when he was occupied elsewhere, documenting everything. Clara stood, coming to join Charlotte at the window. He has a history of this, you know. When we were younger, He manipulated our father into disinheriting our younger brother over a fabricated scandal. Robert died alone and penniless because Vincent wanted his portion of the inheritance. Charlotte turned to her friend, seeing the pain in Clara's eyes. That must have been agonizing for you, to discover this about your own brother. It was. It is. Clara's voice broke. But I couldn't let him do it again. Couldn't let him destroy another family for his greed. You've been my dearest friend, Charlotte, and His Grace doesn't deserve this betrayal from the man he trusted most. Charlotte felt a surge of affection for Clara, followed immediately by determination. She had spent weeks feeling worthless, feeling like the problem, allowing Vincent's carefully crafted narrative to convince her she was the obstacle to Alistair's happiness. But she wasn't the problem. She had never been the problem. Vincent was the problem, and it was time to expose him. We must tell Alistair, Charlotte said firmly. Together, right now, before Vincent can destroy any of this evidence. Clara nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. They gathered the documents carefully, returning them to the leather portfolio. Charlotte's hands were steady now, her purpose clear. Whatever damage had been done to her marriage, whatever distance had grown between her and Alistair, they could face it together once the true villain was exposed. Do you know where His Grace is? Clara asked. The library, most likely. He's been spending mornings there since. Charlotte's voice faltered. Since Edmund arrived, since everything began to fall apart, since he began avoiding his study, I think Vincent's presence there has become unbearable to him. They found Alistair exactly where Charlotte predicted, standing by the library's tall windows, staring out at the grounds with a glass of brandy already in his hand despite the early hour. He looked gaunt, exhausted, as if he'd aged years in the past week. Charlotte's heart twisted at the sight of him. Whatever had broken between them, he was still her husband, still the man she had chosen, and Vincent had been systematically destroying him, just as he'd been destroying her. Alistair, she said softly from the doorway. He turned, and for a moment, surprise flickered across his face, surprise at her presence, at the use of his given name rather than his title. Then his eyes moved to Clara, to the portfolio in Charlotte's hands, and his expression shifted to wariness. Charlotte, Miss Hawke. His voice was carefully neutral. Is something wrong? Charlotte approached slowly, Clara following. She saw him tense, saw him prepare for another confrontation, another painful conversation. But when their eyes met, truly met, for the first time in weeks, she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or hope. Alistair, I need you to listen, Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. There's something you must know about Vincent, something we both need to know. She placed the leather portfolio on the library table between them, her hand lingering on its worn surface. Our marriage has been under attack, she continued, holding his gaze, but not in the way we thought, not because of my failure to conceive, not because of Edmund's presence, not even because of our own mistakes, though we've made plenty. She opened the portfolio, revealing the damning evidence within. We've been under attack by the one man you trusted most, and it's time we fought back. Alistair stared at the documents, then at Charlotte, then at Clara's tear-stained face. Charlotte saw the moment comprehension began to dawn, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to a cold, terrifying fury. Tell me everything, he said quietly, and so they did. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. The study had never felt more like a war room. Alistair sat at his desk, the leather portfolio open before him, documents spread across the mahogany surface like evidence at a trial. Charlotte stood beside him, close enough that her skirts brushed his arm, a small intimacy that felt monumental after weeks of distance. Clara occupied the chair opposite, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale but determined. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls as afternoon faded toward evening. Outside, winter darkness was falling fast, mirroring the cold fury building in Alistair's chest. He's been my advisor for 8 years, Alistair said quietly, his finger tracing the signature on one of Vincent's letters. My father's advisor before that. I trusted him with everything, the estate finances, personal matters, my marriage. His voice broke slightly on the last word, and Charlotte's hand moved without conscious thought to rest on his arm. The touch was tentative, testing, but Alistair covered her hand with his own, holding it there. He betrayed us both, Charlotte said softly, but now we know the truth. Now we can fight back. Alistair looked up at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. He saw the exhaustion in her pale blue eyes, the tension in her shoulders, but also something new, or perhaps something old, rediscovered. Strength, determination. The woman he had married, finally emerging from beneath the weight of manufactured guilt. "I should have seen it," Alistair said. "Should have questioned his motivations, his constant pressure about heirs and duty. I was so caught up in my own inadequacy, my own fear of failure, that I never stopped to ask whose interests he truly served." Clara spoke up, her voice heavy with guilt. "He's very good at manipulation. He's had decades of practice, and he used your honor, your sense of duty, against you, both of you." Alistair stood abruptly, moving to the bell pull. "Enough. It ends tonight. I want him here, now." As they waited for Vincent to arrive, Charlotte remained close to Alistair. The silence between them was different now, not empty, but full of things that needed to be said once this immediate crisis had passed. "Charlotte," Alistair said suddenly, turning to face her, "before he arrives, I need to say something." She met his gaze, waiting. "I'm sorry." The words came roughly, as if torn from somewhere deep inside him. "For all of it. For not fighting for you. For letting him poison my mind with doubt. For making you feel worthless when you are." His voice caught. "When you are the most valuable thing in my life. I should have told you that every day. Instead, I let silence and distance destroy what we had." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry too, for withdrawing, for not trusting you enough to share my pain, for letting myself believe his lies about my inadequacy." She took a breath. "And for not being honest with you about how deeply lonely I've been." Alistair reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. His fingers laced through hers, warm and solid and real. They stood there for a moment, connected, before the sound of footsteps in the corridor announced Vincent's arrival. Charlotte squeezed Alistair's hand once, then released it. They had a battle to fight, but at least now they would fight it together. Vincent entered with his characteristic confidence, his sharp features arranged in an expression of polite inquiry. "Your Grace, you sent for me." His eyes flicked to Charlotte, then to his sister, and something wariness perhaps flickered across his face. "Miss Hawke, Lady Charlotte, an unusual gathering." "Sit down, Vincent." Alistair's voice was cold, controlled. He remained standing, positioning himself behind his desk like a judge behind a bench. Vincent hesitated, then took the indicated chair. "Is something wrong, Your Grace?" "That depends on your perspective." Alistair gestured to the documents spread before him. "I've been reviewing some interesting correspondence. Perhaps you'd like to explain these letters." He pushed the first document across the desk, Vincent's letter to Edmund Carter, inviting him to Blackwood Manor. Vincent's eyes scanned it, and Charlotte saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I merely suggested an old friend visit," Vincent said smoothly. "I thought the company might do Her Grace good. She seemed quite isolated." "Indeed. How thoughtful." Alistair's tone was glacial. He pushed forward another document. "And this loan you extended to Lord Carter, also an act of friendship? I help where I can. And this?" Alistair's voice rose slightly as he presented the draft adoption papers. "Planning to help yourself to my estate as well? To install your son as my heir without my knowledge or consent?" Vincent's composure cracked. He straightened in his chair, his expression hardening. "Your Grace, you must understand." "No, you will understand." Alistair leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "You will understand that I have read every letter, every document, every piece of evidence that proves you have been systematically manipulating me, my wife, and my household for your own financial gain." Clara stood, moving to stand beside Charlotte. "He's been planning this for months, Your Grace, perhaps years, using your trust, your honor, your marriage, all as tools to position himself to control the Blackwood fortune." Vincent turned on his sister, his face contorting with fury. "You betray your own blood for her," he gestured dismissively at Charlotte. "For a woman who cannot even perform the most basic function of a wife." The words hung in the air like poison. Charlotte felt something inside her snap, not break, but transform. All the guilt, all the shame, all the worthlessness she had carried for so long crystallized into pure, righteous anger. "You made me believe I was worthless," she said, her voice steady and cold. She stepped forward, drawing herself up to her full height. "You manipulated my husband's love into doubt. You orchestrated Edmund's return specifically to create distance between us, to make Alistair question my loyalty, to give him reason to consider divorce. I acted in the Blackwood family's best interests. You acted in your own interests," Charlotte's voice rose. "For money, for power, for control of an estate and fortune that will never be yours. You preyed on our pain, Vincent. You took our struggles and weaponized them, all so you could position your own son to inherit what you could never earn yourself." Vincent stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. His mask of civility had completely fallen away now, revealing the calculating ambition beneath. Without an heir, the Blackwood name is meaningless. It will die with you, Blackwood. Everything your family built for 3 centuries will crumble to nothing, he sneered at Charlotte. I would have given it meaning, purpose. Instead, you cling to a barren woman out of misguided sentiment. The room went deadly silent. Then Alistair spoke, his voice soft but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Get out, Vincent blinked. Your Grace, the Blackwood name will endure as I choose it to endure. Alistair's words were measured, final. My wife is worth more than 1,000 heirs, and certainly more than a scheming advisor who values gold over honor. You have manipulated, lied, and betrayed the trust I placed in you. You have attempted to destroy my marriage for profit, and you have shown your true character in this room tonight. Alistair moved around the desk, standing at his full height. I formally dismiss you from my service, effective immediately. You are banned from Blackwood Manor and all associated properties. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings and leave this estate. If you are still here when that hour expires, I will have you removed by force. Vincent's face had gone white with fury. You'll regret this. Without me, without proper guidance, you'll run this estate into the ground. Then that will be my choice to make, not yours. Alistair moved to the bell pull, summoning servants. Escort Mr. Hawke to his chambers and ensure he collects only his personal belongings. Nothing belonging to this household leaves with him. 2 footmen appeared in the doorway. Vincent looked between them, then at Clara, his expression venomous. You've destroyed your own future, sister. Don't expect any support from me when you find yourself alone. I would rather be alone than complicit in your schemes, Clara said quietly. Vincent's laugh was bitter. He straightened his coat with exaggerated dignity, then swept from the room without another word, the footman following close behind. The door closed, leaving Alistair, Charlotte, and Clara in the sudden silence. The fire popped and hissed, the only sound in the room. Alistair moved to the sideboard, pouring 3 glasses of sherry with trembling hands. I apologize you had to witness that, Miss Hawke. Clara, she corrected gently, accepting the glass. After all this, I think we can dispense with formality. Charlotte took her own glass, but didn't drink. Questions still churned in her mind, loose ends that needed addressing. What about Edmund? Alistair's expression tightened. What about him? Clara spoke up quietly. The letters show Vincent paid his debts in exchange for pursuing Charlotte's attention, creating the appearance of impropriety. Edmund was complicit, though perhaps not from the beginning. He was weak, Charlotte said, her voice sad. Not evil, but weak. Desperate enough to accept Vincent's money and play his role. But he made his choice, and I made mine. He's gone now. Alistair was silent for a long moment, staring into his glass. Then, without looking at Charlotte, he asked the question that had clearly been haunting him. Did you? Were you tempted by his offer? To leave with him? Charlotte could have lied, could have spared him the pain of truth. But they had lived with lies their own and Vincent's for too long. For a moment, she said honestly, I was tempted by the escape he offered, by the possibility of a life where I wasn't constantly reminded of my failure, where I could be valued for who I am, rather than mourned for what I cannot provide. Alistair flinched as if struck. But I never wanted him, Charlotte continued firmly. I wanted what he represented, freedom from judgment, from expectation, from pain. But the man himself? No. I never wanted Edmund. Only you. I have only ever wanted you. Their eyes met across the firelit room, and Charlotte saw the depth of Alistair's relief, his pain, his love, all of it laid bare in his expression. Clara cleared her throat delicately. I believe I should retire for the evening. It's been... She gave a small, exhausted laugh. It's been quite a day. Clara, Charlotte moved to embrace her friend. Thank you for your courage, for your loyalty, for everything. Thank you for not turning me away when I brought you such terrible news about my own brother. Clara's eyes were bright with tears. I hope you can both find your way back to each other now. After Clara departed, closing the door softly behind her, Alistair and Charlotte stood on opposite sides of the study, the full weight of the evening's revelations settling over them. The fire burned low in the hearth. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and between them, finally, lay the truth, painful, messy, but cleansing. So, Alistair said quietly, what happens now? Charlotte looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw not the Duke, not the disappointed aristocrat, but simply Alistair, flawed, hurting, but hers. Now, she said, we talk, really talk, about everything we should have said months ago, years ago, Everything Vincent's manipulation prevented us from saying. Alistair nodded slowly. I don't know how to fix what's been broken between us. Neither do I, Charlotte admitted. But perhaps we could start by being honest, by remembering why we chose each other in the first place, by deciding if what we had is worth fighting for. It is, Alistair said immediately. Charlotte, it is. You are worth fighting for. Our marriage is worth fighting for. I don't know if I haven't already destroyed it beyond repair. Charlotte crossed the room, standing before him. This close, she could see every line of exhaustion on his face, every shadow of pain in his eyes. But she could also see hope, fragile, tentative, but real. Then let's find out, she said softly. Together. Chapter 9. The line ends with me. The study felt different now, warmer somehow, despite the fire burning low in the hearth. Alistair and Charlotte stood facing each other, the space between them charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. I don't know where to begin, Alistair said, his voice rough. The beginning, perhaps. Charlotte moved to the settee, settling onto its edge. Or the middle, or anywhere that feels true. Alistair joined her, maintaining a careful distance close enough to touch, but not touching. Not yet. I never needed an heir, he said suddenly, the words rushing out as if they'd been dammed up too long. I know that sounds absurd, given everything that's happened, but it's true. I only ever needed you. But I was so caught up in what I should want, what society demanded, what duty required, what 300 years of history expected, that I forgot what I did want. He turned to face her fully. I wanted a partner, a companion, someone to share this life with in all its complexity and responsibility and occasional joy. I had that, Charlotte. I had you, and I let Vincent's poison and my own cowardice convince me it wasn't enough. Charlotte felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I felt like I'd tricked you, like you'd married me expecting one thing and I'd given you nothing. Every month when my courses came, I felt like I was disappointing you all over again, failing at the one thing I was supposed to do. You gave me everything, Alistair said fiercely. Love, partnership, a home that felt like more than just stone and history. You gave me laughter and conversation, and someone who saw past the title to the man beneath. I was just too blind to see it, too consumed by imagined obligations to appreciate what I actually had. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of miscommunication settling between them. What will we tell people? Charlotte asked finally. Society will never accept this decision. To deliberately forego an heir, they'll see it as shirking duty, as selfishness. Alistair's laugh was short but genuine. Then society can go hang. I'll make a formal declaration. The Blackwood line ends with me, by choice, because my wife is worth more than any legacy of blood and title. Let them talk. Let them judge. I'm finished caring what anyone thinks except you. Charlotte searched his face for doubt, for reservation, but found only certainty. You mean that? With every fiber of my being. Alistair shifted closer. But that doesn't mean the Blackwood name dies meaninglessly. We can build a different kind of legacy, one that actually matters. What do you mean? A charitable foundation, Alistair said, warming to the idea. For women's education. You've always been passionate about that. We could establish a school in the village, fund scholarships for girls who show academic promise, make real opportunities available to those who would never have them otherwise. Charlotte felt something lift in her chest, hope, perhaps, or purpose. A school, yes, and we could support young scholars and artists. Offer patronage to those with talent but no connections. Agricultural innovation, Alistair added, his eyes bright now. I've been reading about new farming techniques. We could implement them here, create more sustainable practices, more jobs for local families, make Blackwood Manor a center for progressive thought rather than just another aristocratic estate clinging to the past. We could actually do good, Charlotte said wonderingly. Real, tangible good. Not just exist as decorative figureheads, but create something that outlasts us. Yes. Alistair reached for her hand, tentative. If you'll help me. If you'll build this new legacy with me. Charlotte laced her fingers through his, and the simple connection felt like coming home. I will. Of course I will. Alistair stood, drawing her up with him. They faced each other in the firelight, and Charlotte saw everything in his expression. Love, regret, hope, determination. I love you, he said, his free hand coming up to cup her face. Only you. Always you. Not the Duchess who might have given me heirs. Not some idealized version I constructed in my mind. You, Charlotte. Exactly as you are. Charlotte's voice broke on a sob. And I love you. Not the Duke, not the estate or the title or any of it. You, Alistair, just you. He drew her close, their foreheads touching, breathing the same air. Can we start again? Not forget what's happened. We can't do that. And perhaps we shouldn't, but begin fresh from here. Yes, Charlotte whispered. Please, yes. When Alistair kissed her, it was tender and desperate and healing all at once. Years of pain and loneliness and miscommunication dissolved in that moment, replaced by something simpler and infinitely more precious: love, acknowledged and reciprocated, and finally given room to breathe. They held each other in the firelit study long into the night, talking and crying and laughing and slowly, carefully beginning to rebuild what had been broken. And when they finally retired to their chambers, it was together the door to Charlotte's dressing room left open, the distance between them finally, blessedly closed. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the breakfast room windows, turning Charlotte's hair to gold as she bent over a letter. Late spring had transformed Blackwood Manor's grounds into a riot of green and bloom, and the windows stood open to admit the sweet air. "Listen to this," Charlotte said, her voice bright with excitement. "Miss Patterson writes that 3 of our girls from the school have qualified for the advanced mathematics program at the academy in York." 3, Alistair. From our little village school." Alistair entered, still in his riding clothes from an early morning inspection of the new irrigation system. He carried his own letter, grinning. "And young Thomas Fletcher, the blacksmith's son we're sponsoring at Cambridge, has been asked to present his paper on agricultural mechanics to the Royal Society." He leaned down to kiss Charlotte's cheek, and she smiled up at him, stealing a strawberry from his plate as he sat beside her rather than at the opposite end of the table. "Thief," he accused fondly. "Provider of necessary nutrients to your wife," she corrected, popping the berry into her mouth. Their easy banter was interrupted by the arrival of the Morning Post. Most of it was routine estate business, thank you notes from scholarship recipients, invitations to local gatherings, but one envelope made Charlotte's smile falter. She opened it, read the contents, and Alistair saw her expression close slightly. "What is it?" Charlotte handed him the invitation. "Lady Pemberton's summer ball. She includes her condolences for the unfortunate end of the Blackwood line." The pointed cruelty of it hung in the air between them. Then Alistair took the invitation, walked to the fireplace, and threw it directly into the flames. "Alistair, Lady Pemberton can keep her false sympathy and her ball." He returned to his seat, taking Charlotte's hand. "Do you ever regret it? When people speak cruelly like that? When society reminds us we've chosen a path they cannot understand?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment, considering. "Never. Not for a single moment. Do you?" "Only that I wasted so much time," Alistair said softly. "So much time feeling inadequate, making you feel inadequate, when I could have been simply loving you, building this life we have now. That's my only regret, the years we lost to fear and silence." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "Then we'll make the most of the years we have left." After breakfast, they rode together to the village school, a modest but well-built structure on land Alistair had donated, funded by the Blackwood Educational Foundation they'd established. Charlotte taught literature there one day each week, and today was her day. Alistair watched from the doorway as Charlotte sat among a circle of girls aged 10 to 14, a volume of Shakespeare open before them. Her face was radiant as she read aloud, pausing to explain, to question, to encourage the girls to think critically about what they heard. "What do you think Portia means here?" Charlotte asked. "When she speaks of the quality of mercy." A girl with dark braids raised her hand tentatively. "That being kind is more powerful than being cruel?" "Precisely, Mary. And why might Shakespeare have a woman deliver this speech?" The discussion flowed, and Alistair felt a surge of pride watching his wife in her element, not performing the role of Duchess, but genuinely engaged, genuinely making a difference in these young lives. After the lesson, as they rode back toward the manor, Charlotte was thoughtful. "What is it?" Alistair asked. "I was just thinking. If we'd had a daughter, I would have wanted her to have what those girls have now. The chance to learn, to think, to become more than society dictates." She smiled. "Perhaps that's another kind of legacy. Not one child, but dozens, hundreds, eventually." "I like that," Alistair said. "I like that very much." They spent the afternoon reviewing plans for the new public library they were having, built on the manor grounds, a substantial building that would house not only books, but also meeting rooms for lectures and community gatherings. The architect's drawings showed a beautiful structure with large windows and comfortable reading areas. "Open to the entire county," Alistair said, running his finger along the blueprint. "No restrictions based on class or gender. Revolutionary, according to Lord Wetherby." "Lord Wetherby can keep his opinions," Charlotte said tartly, making Alistair laugh. As evening approached, they walked together to the east terrace, watching the sun begin its descent. The grounds of Blackwood Manor stretched before them, workers heading home from the fields, gardeners tending the roses that had been Charlotte's special project, smoke rising from tenant cottages in the distance. Charlotte rested her head on Alistair's shoulder, and his arm came naturally around her waist. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their world come alive with the peace of early evening. "We received another request today," Charlotte said. "A young woman in Derbyshire, exceptional marks in the sciences, but her family cannot afford university. She's asked if our scholarship program might consider her." "Of course, we'll review her application." Alistair pressed a kiss to the top of Charlotte's head. "How many is that now?" 12 young people we're supporting." 15. "And the village school serves 43 students." Charlotte smiled. "Not bad for 6 months' work." "Not bad at all. What shall we do next? Expand the school? Start a second foundation focused on the arts? Perhaps travel to the continent next spring?" Charlotte suggested. "Visit universities. See what other progressive education programs exist. Bring ideas back here." "I'd like that. We could visit Venice. You always wanted to see Venice." They fell into easy discussion of plans, of possibilities, of the future they were building together. The conversation flowed as naturally as breathing, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter. After a while, Alistair grew quiet, his gaze distant. "What are you thinking?" Charlotte asked. "That Vincent was right about one thing." Alistair's voice was contemplative. "Without children, there will be no Blackwood after me. The name dies with me. 300 years of history ended." Charlotte straightened, turning to look at him with concern. But Alistair was smiling a genuine, peaceful smile. "But he was wrong about everything else," Alistair continued. "This estate, this name, it was never about blood. It was never about an unbroken chain of inheritance. It's about what we build, what we give, how we love. That's the real legacy. Not names in a genealogy, but lives actually changed. Students educated who wouldn't have been. Innovations implemented that will benefit this community for generations. Ideas planted that will grow long after we're gone." He cupped Charlotte's face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "We've built something beautiful here, something that matters, and we're not finished yet." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "No, we're not finished at all." The sun crested the horizon fully now, bathing the estate in golden light. Everything, the manor, the grounds, the village beyond, seemed to glow with promise. Charlotte turned in Alistair's embrace to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "The line may end with you, my love," she said softly, "but our story, this is just the beginning." Alistair kissed her then, slow and sweet, filled with all the love and hope and determination that had brought them through the darkness into this new dawn. Behind them, Blackwood Manor stood solid and enduring, but its meaning had changed. No longer just a monument to the past, it had become something living, a place where futures were built, where possibilities were nurtured, where two people had chosen love over duty, and, in doing so, had created a legacy worth far more than any bloodline. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the manor as the sun climbed higher. There was work to do, always work to do. Letters to write, plans to make, lives to touch and change and improve. But they would do it together, and that made all the difference. The Blackwood line would end with Alistair, exactly as he had declared. But the Blackwood legacy, the real legacy of love, service, and purposeful living, that was only just beginning. And it would endure long after the last Duke and his devoted Duchess had passed into memory, carried forward by the hundreds of lives they had touched and the example they had set, that sometimes the greatest act of duty is choosing love. That sometimes the noblest legacy is built not on blood, but on the countless small acts of kindness and courage that ripple outward to change the world. Part 2. The Impossible Gift. Overview. 6 months after choosing love over legacy, the impossible happens. Just as Alistair and Charlotte have found peace in their decision to let the Blackwood line end with them, building schools, changing lives, and creating a legacy of love rather than blood, Charlotte begins experiencing unusual symptoms. What follows is a journey neither dared to hope for, a pregnancy that defies all medical expectations. But this miraculous blessing brings its own challenges. Charlotte must navigate the fear of losing what she never thought she could have, while Alistair struggles with protective instincts that threaten to smother the partnership they've rebuilt. Society, which condemned them for their choice, now watches with predatory interest, waiting to see if this miracle will validate their cruel judgments or prove to be false hope. As Charlotte's pregnancy progresses, both must confront a terrifying question. After building an entire future around being enough without children, can they embrace this unexpected gift without losing themselves? And when complications arise that put both Charlotte and the baby at risk, Alistair faces the ultimate test, choosing between the heir he never thought he'd have and the wife he cannot live without. Part 2 explores the complexity of getting what you thought you wanted only after you'd made peace without it, the terror of hoping again after accepting loss, and the profound truth that sometimes the greatest miracles come not when we're desperately seeking them, but when we finally learn to be content without them. The line may have been meant to end with him, but fate, it seems, had other plans. And so ends the story of Duke Alistair and Lady Charlotte Blackwood, a couple who discovered that the greatest legacy isn't written in bloodlines, but carved in the lives we touch and the love we choose every single day. If this story moved you, I'd love to know. What was your favorite moment? Was it when Alistair finally stood up to Vincent, when Charlotte found her voice again, or that beautiful dawn scene where they chose their future together? Drop a comment below and share which part of their journey resonated most with your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to Lyra's Romance Stories for more emotional historical romances that will make you believe in the transformative power of love. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story about couples who fight for each other against impossible odds. And here's something special. If this video reaches 1,000 likes, I'll release part 2 where the impossible happens and Alistair and Charlotte's story takes an unexpected turn that will leave you breathless. You won't want to miss what fate has in store for them. Check the description below for the complete written version of this story, links to similar romances, and a special playlist of all our stories about second chances and healing love. Thank you for spending this time with Alistair and Charlotte. Until our next story, remember, true legacy isn't about what we inherit, it's about what we choose to build, who we choose to love, and the courage to define our own happiness. This is Lyra, reminding you that the best love stories are the ones where two imperfect people refuse to give up on each other. Sweet dreams and happy Christmas.